Just over a month post our July balance patch and 2 weeks after Valkyrie's release, it is that time once again to see how the balance of classes in Lost Ark are faring and whom comes out on top after this big swap in power. In a double balance patch that saw DPS variants, the support classes becoming viable, and a balance looking to up the power of lesser played and underperforming specs, how did the dust settle? Like I've been doing, this video will be broken into segments to give the sought out info in a somewhat orderly way. You can skip to those sections now or continue listening as I break down the why and how these variables were chosen. We will be looking at hard mode Brel Gate 2 data from post-July update from classes from 1690 to 1700. I will show normal Brel Gate 2 for 1670s, but that will be brief this time around as achieving a higher main item level is somewhat more attainable with the summer's juice. I'll also look to show one more new factor in play, that Uwu, where I'm pulling all this data from, has a new filter that I think will provide a much better look at class balance away from the whales who are juiced to the gills. We'll be looking at combat power from 1500 to 1800 for the same gate, as this fits in at not being overtly overjuiced for hard mode Brel. After this, we will break down the biggest changes in placement based on my data gathered over these many months, and we will finally take a look at Gate 3 Mordum hard mode for the same combat power variants. I disagree wholeheartedly with folks who think we should be looking at the balance of the game via the lens of performance on Gate 3 Mordum. That fight is near constant start to finish and is heavily biased towards burst positional classes. There's no other fight like that in the endgame and likely won't be in our near future, so looking at a fight that is more balanced around how raids typically are set up, where positional classes typically are more on par with non-positionals in an even playing field, is ideally the better setup. Hence, I have put high-end restrictions as best I could on Brel to opt away from super fast burst-oriented runs. Like I said, I will show the chart for Mordum Gate 3, but it will be super brief. All this data is compiled using Uwu, which is the best source for Lost Ark alongside the Nexus, and both will be linked below. They pull data directly from Loa Logs, a damage meter that manually gets uploaded by a large portion of the player base that utilizes it. This data changes daily based upon the amount of logs uploaded, and part of the reason this video was stalled so long was to see where Valk landed somewhat more fairly. But the main one that will have changed is the combat power, as I've been tweaking that one constantly to update and accommodate these incoming logs. Don't look too precisely at specific positioning as these classes move around hourly, just get an idea of where they are performing, and like I always say, this is just a rough idea. Play what you like. I really like my BK Breaker, my Mayhem Zerk, but if you look at Gate 3 Mordum, these are some of the worst performers, but I still have a great time. On to the first section, hard mode rankings for Gate 2 Brel for classes between 1690 and 1700. At 15, we have Asura Breaker. This saw some notable tweaks, more notable being it doesn't have a weird punching phase to account for adrenaline uptime anymore, so it's making a somewhat comeback. The Asura main in my static went from having heavy depression to slightly less. A win's a win. At 14, Empress Arcana sees a notable drop of 10 placements, and a brief glance over of this patch sees buffs and nerfs galore to skills, so I'm guessing the nerfs were more notable this time around, or others buffs were just that good. At 13, we have Peacemaker Gunslinger. A lot of this class as a whole saw tweaks from this update, probably because Time to Hunt saw some giga love thrown its way, but it seems some of the goodness has passed along to Peacemaker as sloppy seconds, and it maintains a high positioning. Surely Time to Hunt is the worst spec still. At 12, we have Gravity Training Destroyer. This also doesn't seem to be getting too much love from these two patches that would be notable, but the class sees a 23 rank increase, and I'm thinking this must be due to either comfort for players on this now dated raid, or something clicked in Destroyer's head as, spoiler alert, this isn't Destroyer's only placement here. At 11, Barrage Artillerist is holding strong, only losing a few positions despite not getting too much love from the patch. At 10, Phantom Beast or Crit Wild Soul increases its placement as those harnessing its raw power are rising to the occasion finally. At 9, we have Shock Scrapper. A brief glance at the balance sees a lot of shock skills getting damage buffs and what looks like identity and leap tree buffs, so it's plus 19 increase in the rankings. One day I'll try the spec out again, but for now I stay with my brain turned off on Tie. At 8, we have my main, Mayhem Zerker. We saw Berserker's other spec get an overhaul, and similar to Peacemaker Gunslinger, we see some benefits of this. We lost a few placements, but still a big contender. I will note BT is just shy of any of the main lists today, so I will mention that version now pumps and has an incredibly high skill damage ceiling, but its new rotation has got me tweaking out because of old muscle memory, so I imagine this is the cause of it not being as high up as I think it should. At 7, we have Enhanced Weapon Deadeye. I've seen a lot of people complaining recently that this class is doing bad for some reason. Even the Deadeye in my static tries to suggest it's a low-ranking class. I say, stop lying to people, you still are pumping. Although the class doesn't see notable big buffs besides a 3% overall increase, the class sees a nice little position increase. At 6, we have my happiest upgrade, Esoteric War Dancer. The new rotation that's based around the new slight identity tweak and its buffs getting the long-awaited time increase makes this feel so chill to play now. Note, it still isn't super easy, but it isn't as stressful and concise anymore and doesn't do nearly as much Z as it's been doing for these past few months. I'm really happy with it currently, and it sees a plus 23 rank increase. At 5, we see Robust Soul Fist. The class went unchanged, and guess what? It still only saw a slight deranking of 2. Unlike EO, it held its position better, and as I said before, this class seems to always be ranking high. At 4, we have Rage Hammer Destroyer. This saw some tweaks, not a lot, but it is a surprise for me to see it faring so well, especially with how bad my 1650 is at Arkeos. Beware anyone whom is new, this class is not the easiest to pilot. Don't be swayed by the fact it has the biggest number in the game. At 3, we have Ferality, or better known as Spec Wild Soul. This class saw some much needed nerfs since it was busted, but guess what? It's still a top contender and only lost 2 spots. At 2, we have Control Glavier, and this one is puzzling for me. I didn't think this class's tweaks were notable, but it seems the identity tweak and the boosted mana has relinquished enough of their problems to be a top contender. I don't remember Control being that fun to play, but maybe I need to give it another try as it sees a huge increase of plus 29 spots. At number 1, we have one of the most laughed at specs and what we presumed was a large reason we didn't get the first balance in this patch earlier, TTH Gunslinger. Whatever Rose Blossom is, that shit supposedly rocks, and this thing is doing crazy numbers for a Hitmaster class. The first patch giga buffed this spec, and the second pulled it back a bit, but it still is a huge damage factor, sliding it into the number 1 spot. As mentioned, I will not touch on normal Braille standings too much, but will briefly show the top 15 list and note that some classes like DPS Bard and CO Summoner are doing numbers here. I know mid-video like requests are super annoying, but I can't express enough how beneficial they are for YouTube to think this video is not just one of the millions of daily junk uploaded. I appreciate any and all interaction. Now, a list that does matter, and what probably matters more than the eye level specific list, is the combat power rankings. Why does this mean more, you say? Well, the power a character has, in most cases, isn't really defined by their eye level. It helps with access to power spikes due to access to new things, but one 1680 can have significantly more damage in its build than another. This is where combat power comes into play. Korea has been doing this for a bit, but now it's arrived on the Western shores and in-game, and combat power is now present. This allows you to see at first glance how strong a character is based upon the laundry list of different variables a character in Lost Ark can use to increase their damage output. So instead of having characters of high variance of damage cooked into their builds, we can factor this into a filter on Uwu and get characters at a somewhat even playing field, using only the class spec as the changing damage variable. This isn't a perfect equalizing factor, as the score isn't perfect, but it is much better in my opinion than just using eye level. As mentioned, I'll be using combat power between 1500 to 1800 for hard mode Brel Gate 2. This is a decently built character, but not grossly overpowered for hard mode, so it should be a good baseline. Uwu doesn't allow for closer than 300 difference at the moment, so we are working with what we have. At 15, we have Barrage, once again maintaining a similar position. At 14, we have Deathblow Striker, not seen on the other list, but it just fell short off that list and has a similar foothold here. At 13, we have Drizzle. This one is notable as my list hasn't portrayed Drizzle that high, and combat power is suggesting it may be performing stronger than we may have previously thought. At 12, we have EO Soulfist. It holds a similar position to the other lists. At 11, we have EW Deadeye, once again a similar spot. At 10, Robust, maintaining a close relationship with its other spec. At 9, we have Control, not number 2, but another confirming factor that it is performing very well after this balance. At 8, we have Shock, near identical to the previous list. At 7, we have Crit Wild Soul. And at 6, we have Time to Hunt. Not number 1, but this list fluctuates. We're mostly looking at rough placements, not specifics. At 5, we have Rage Hammer, another similar positioning. At 4, we have what I imagine most have been waiting to see, an inkling of DPS Val. This probably won't make a defining position on the other scale for a bit, as we we were into week 3 of people kitting out their new characters and catching up on these new systems. But with combat score, it equalizes where it needs to, and we can see it popping its prominent tits up to make an appearance. I've been playing this class casually since its release, still have it shy of 1670, but this has got to be one of the most chill classes and rotations in the game. It's Hitmaster and its rotation is semi-press when it's up, but Prowl Red skills in your Z damage amplification window, and when you have achieved 15 stacks of hits, you can unleash your Z, which hits like an actual truck, and has push immunity. High skill players may want to opt away from it because of how simple it is, but as a chill alt, it's been great so far, and with 2 weeks of data, it's showing it's a high damage contender. At 3, we have Lunar Reaper, still a class that seems to be painful to play, but still performs low-key very well. I'm just basing this off of people always saying another patch, no Reaper buffs, so I may have been gaslit. At 2, GT Destroyer, which is the opposite of the other list, so this is interesting. And number 1 is Ferality or Spec Wild Soul. Not a huge surprise, it was number 1 in the last video, and it seems to be holding a top DPS position regardless of the nerfs. Before we touch on a quick overview of Mordum, let's take a look at the overall biggest winners and losers from this patch. This part of the video is just the overall outcome of the balance on the DPS tier list, with those making the biggest jumps and losses being something notable to look at each time. We'll break down hard mode and then I will just show normal for those interested. At number 10, we have Hunger Reaper, seeing a loss of 18 positions. Not gonna lie, I have no idea what its 2 balances gave the class, but it seems to have really hurt Hunger. At number 9, we have Shock Scrapper, seeing a rise of 19 positions. As previously noted, it got a lot of skill and identity love in this patch. At number 8, we have my boy BT Zerk. This shit rips now, seeing an increase of 20 positions, and I think it's being held down by its high ceiling, but also low floor. At number 7, we see GT Destroyer gain 23 spots as something happened that makes that class in general moe now. At number 6, we have SO War Dancer, seeing a 23 position increase, and I'm personally loving playing mine. At number 5, we have DS Sharpshooter with the second highest fall off from this balance patch. It got legitimately nothing in either patch and has succumbed 25 spots. At number 4, we have Pistolier with a plus 25 position increase, likely due to that same love EW Deadeye got from the all skill damage increase of 3%. At number 3, we have TTH Gunslinger, that has been on all of these lists as one of the worst performance to one of the best with a plus 25 increase as well. At number 2, we have the actual biggest loser of the patch, Reflux Sork with minus 28 spots. The one in my statics still rips, so I don't know what's going on here, but don't be sad Sorks, you guys get 3 Doomsdays per cycle in the near future. At number 1, the biggest winner is Control Glavier with a plus 29 spot increase, and similar to BT and TTH, saw a damage ascendance in this patch as it was part of the specs that have been underperforming, seeing damage reworks and benefiting heavy from it. Now here's the numbers for normal, nothing too notable or prominent except for the fact that DPS Bard alts here are tearing it up. Finally, let's do a quick look at hard mode Mordum with the same combat power used for hard mode Brel, 1500 to 1800. I don't want to spend too much time on this as I don't think this fight is too notable for all around balance since it highly biases towards burst positionals. Uptime positionals like Pred and Enhanced Weapon Deadeye don't pull ahead because everyone has uptime here since it's a somewhat constant fight, and that really only gives them an edge over the uptime non-positionals like Mayhem Zerk or DI Shadowhunter. This rule doesn't work across the board though, as non-positionals that have a hard time landing everything really pull away here since the boss is immobile the whole fight, with things like both specs of Summoner, Reflux, and Knight's Edge performing very well. This isn't a hard and definitive rule, but this fight has a ranking unlike any other raid in this game and rewards those who typically have a harder time with regular moving bosses whom aren't omnidirectional, thus balancing out their damage in those regular fights but amping it to the moon here. Inversely, classes that perform pretty good across the board get hurt in this fight heavy, like Mayhem Zerk performs great gates 1 and 2, but falls to the floor in gate 3 and should really think about swapping specs for better performance on this fight. I would not base class picks on anything besides what you enjoy, but I beg, do not look at gate 3 Mordum's rankings as this is not the true balance of the game. Well, that is all for this video. What have you been playing, and if you like it, make a recommendation below for new players who stumble across this video in their search for class suggestions. I imagine they are quite open to good suggestions for them, so leave it down below. Or if you're one of those people, check out my previous rankings list where I give a few class recommendations myself near the end. Check out my new and returning Lost Ark playlist for guides for new folks, or check out my solo raid series with Mark. Or if you want something else, check out my review of this cute little life scaling game that is a merger of Animal Crossing and Zelda and is one of this year's most chill games to release. Until next time, I'm EasyBreak. Toodaloo.